The first thing you must understand is that respect is not something you demand from people. It is something your behavior teaches them to give you. The moment you begin chasing respect, explaining your worth, defending every decision, or desperately trying to prove that you cannot be treated badly, you have already placed your emotional state in someone else's hands. You have allowed another person's behavior to determine your peace, your confidence, and even your sense of identity. Real strength begins when you stop asking, how do I make them respect me? And start asking, what behavior will I accept from people? And what will I do when they cross that line? People constantly observe what you tolerate. They may not say it openly, but they notice whether your words have consequences. They notice whether you complain about something but continue accepting it. They notice whether you threaten to walk away but never actually do. They notice whether you become angry when challenged, whether you immediately defend yourself when criticized, and whether a little pressure is enough to make you abandon your boundaries. Human beings learn from patterns. If someone discovers that disrespect produces no meaningful consequence, they may eventually repeat it because your reaction has taught them that the behavior is safe. This does not mean you should become aggressive, intimidating, or obsessed with making others afraid of you. That is not power. Anger can create temporary fear, but fear created through aggression rarely creates genuine respect. Real personal power is quieter. It comes from consistency. It comes from knowing what you will accept, communicating it clearly, and then behaving according to your own standards. You do not need to threaten someone when your actions already demonstrate that you will not participate in situations that violate your boundaries. Think about the difference between someone who constantly announces, "You better respect me," and someone who simply carries themselves with calm confidence. The first person is asking for recognition. The second person is demonstrating self-respect. One needs an audience, the other needs no approval. When you stop trying to convince people that you are valuable, your behavior begins speaking for you. This is why emotional control becomes so important. Disrespect is often most powerful when it can provoke you. Someone says something insulting and suddenly you are angry. Someone ignores you and you immediately chase an explanation. Someone criticizes you and you spend 20 minutes defending yourself. Someone tries to provoke you and you give them exactly the reaction they wanted. In each case, the other person has discovered a button they can press. Your emotions have become accessible to them. The stronger response is to pause, not because you are weak, not because you have nothing to say, but because you refuse to surrender control of yourself. Ask yourself what actually happened. Was it intentional? Is it worth addressing? Is this person misunderstanding you, testing you, manipulating you, or simply behaving badly? Once you create that small space between what happens and how you respond, you regain your position. You also need to understand that not every disrespect deserves a confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful response is a clear sentence. Sometimes it is changing the subject. Sometimes it is creating distance. Sometimes it is refusing to participate in an argument that has no productive purpose. And sometimes it is simply allowing someone's behavior to reveal who they are while you continue moving forward. Your goal is not to win every interaction. Your goal is to stop losing yourself inside them. When you establish boundaries, do not make them complicated. A boundary is not a speech about how terrible someone has made you feel. It is a decision about what you will and will not participate in. You can communicate calmly, I'm not comfortable being spoken to that way, or if we're going to discuss this, we can do it respectfully. Then let your behavior support your words. If the behavior continues, create appropriate distance. The power is in consistency. The world will always contain people who misunderstand you, underestimate you, criticize you, or attempt to test your patience. You cannot control all of them, but you can control the standards you live by. You can control whether you react impulsively. You can control whether you abandon your principles simply to be accepted. The moment you understand this, respect becomes less about controlling other people and more about mastering yourself. And when you master yourself, you become much harder to manipulate, provoke, or push beyond your limits. Respect yourself so consistently that you no longer need to demand respect from anyone else. People rarely begin by openly disrespecting you. It usually starts much smaller, a comment that crosses the line, a joke at your expense, someone interrupting you repeatedly, someone ignoring a boundary you already expressed, someone realizing that you will complain but never act. These moments may seem insignificant individually, but they reveal something important about human behavior. People learn how far they can go by watching what happens when they cross the line. This is why disrespect is often less about the insult itself and more about the pattern that follows it. When someone behaves badly and discovers that nothing changes, They receive information. They learn that your boundaries may not be serious. They learn that your words may not have consequences. And if they are the kind of person who constantly tests others, they may continue pushing until they discover where your real limit is. You must understand this without becoming suspicious of everyone around you. Not every mistake is an attack. Not every disagreement is disrespect. People can misunderstand you, speak carelessly, or make mistakes without having malicious intentions. Strength means being able to distinguish between an honest mistake and a repeated pattern of behavior. If someone makes a mistake, acknowledges it, and changes, there is no reason to turn the situation into a battle. But when someone repeatedly crosses the same boundary after you have made your position clear, the situation is different. This is where many people lose their power. They confuse being kind with being endlessly available. They confuse patience with tolerating everything. They believe that if they remain agreeable enough, helpful enough, forgiving enough, everyone will eventually treat them well. But human relationships do not work that way. Kindness without boundaries can become an invitation for people to take more than they should. You do not teach people how to treat you through speeches. You teach them through patterns. If you constantly answer immediately when someone demands your attention, they may begin expecting instant access to you. If you always apologize even when you did nothing wrong, some people may begin assuming you will accept the blame. If you repeatedly tolerate rude comments because you are afraid of creating conflict, the person making those comments may become increasingly comfortable with them. And if you constantly explain yourself to people who have already decided to misunderstand you, you teach them that they can keep you trapped in endless explanations, the answer is not to become cold. It is to become clear. Clarity changes everything. Instead of reacting with anger, communicate your boundary. Instead of making dramatic threats, make a calm decision about what you will do. Instead of trying to force someone to behave differently, control your own participation in the situation. There is another reason people disrespect others. They sometimes sense insecurity. This does not mean that insecure people deserve disrespect. They do not. But when someone constantly seeks approval, fears disagreement, or changes their position whenever someone challenges them, certain personalities recognize an opportunity to gain control. They discover that pressure works. A little criticism changes your behavior. A little rejection makes you chase them. A little hostility makes you desperate to prove yourself. The solution is not pretending to be fearless. It is becoming comfortable with the possibility that not everyone will approve of you. When you stop needing universal approval, you become much harder to control. You can hear criticism without collapsing. You can disagree without becoming hostile. You can walk away from an argument without feeling that you lost. You can allow someone to misunderstand you without spending hours trying to correct their opinion. That is a form of strength most people underestimate. People also disrespect those who constantly disrespect themselves. Every time you betray your own principles merely to fit in, you weaken your relationship with yourself. Every time you accept treatment you know you should not accept because you are afraid of being alone, you send yourself a message that your own standards are negotiable. So begin paying attention to patterns. Who respects your no? Who only treats you well when they need something? Who becomes hostile when you establish a boundary? Who apologizes and changes? And who apologizes only to repeat the same behavior? These observations are not invitations to judge everyone. They are opportunities to understand people clearly. You do not need to announce that you are becoming stronger. You do not need to threaten anyone. You do not need to make people fear your anger. Simply become consistent. Let your yes mean yes. Let your no mean no. Let your boundaries have meaning. Let your actions match your words. And when someone repeatedly demonstrates that they do not respect your standards, have enough self-respect to create distance without turning the situation into a war. Once you understand why people test boundaries, you stop taking every act of disrespect personally and start responding with awareness instead of emotion. Your power begins where your need for approval ends. There is a moment in almost every difficult interaction when you realize that the real battle is not about what was said. It is about whether you will allow another person to control your emotional state. Someone can criticize you, dismiss you, interrupt you, challenge you, or attempt to embarrass you, but none of those actions automatically have the power to define you. That power is given away when you react without thinking. Disrespect becomes dangerous when you personalize it. The moment you hear an insult and immediately think, How dare they speak to me like that? Your attention moves away from your own standards and toward the other person. You begin thinking about proving them wrong, defending your reputation, or making them regret what they said. Now the interaction is controlling you. Your mind is no longer focused on what matters. It is focused on the person who provoked you. This is why emotional control is one of the foundations of personal power. Control does not mean becoming emotionless. It means refusing to let temporary emotions make permanent decisions for you. Anger may tell you that something matters, but anger should not automatically decide what you do next. You can acknowledge the emotion without obeying it. Imagine someone makes a disrespectful comment in front of other people. Your first instinct might be to respond immediately, raise your voice, or attack them verbally. But pause for a moment. Ask yourself what outcome you actually want. Do you want to create a larger argument? Do you want to prove that you are angry? Or do you want to communicate that the behavior is unacceptable while remaining in control of yourself? That pause changes the entire dynamic. When you remain calm, you give yourself time to observe. You can notice whether the person is genuinely trying to communicate something, deliberately provoking you, seeking attention, or simply behaving carelessly. You can decide whether the situation deserves a response at all. And if it does, you can choose your words instead of allowing your emotions to choose them for you. This is one of the biggest differences between reacting and responding. Reaction is immediate, response is deliberate. A reactive person can be controlled by anyone who knows what buttons to push. If criticism makes you defensive, criticism controls you. If rejection makes you desperate, rejection controls you. If someone ignoring you makes you chase them, their attention controls you. If an insult instantly makes you angry, then the person who insulted you has discovered a shortcut into your mind. Do not give people that shortcut. You do not need to become distant from everyone. You simply need to stop making your emotional state dependent on other people's behavior. Someone can dislike you without destroying your confidence. Someone can disagree with you without forcing you into an argument. Someone can misunderstand you without requiring an hour-long explanation. Someone can attempt to provoke you without receiving the reaction they expected. There is tremendous strength in being difficult to provoke, but understand the difference between calmness and weakness. Staying calm does not mean allowing someone to mistreat you. You can be calm and firm at the same time. You can say that is not acceptable without shouting. You can end a conversation without insulting the other person. You can create distance without announcing revenge. You can protect your boundaries without turning every disagreement into a battle. In fact, the calmer you become, the clearer your boundaries can become. When emotions are intense, people often say things they later regret. They make threats they cannot keep. They reveal insecurities they should have kept private. They explain too much. They attack unrelated weaknesses. They turn a small disagreement into a permanent conflict. Then, after the emotion disappears, they are left dealing with the consequences. Self-control protects you from that cycle. Before responding to disrespect, give yourself a moment. Breathe. Observe. Think. Ask whether the issue is important, whether the person deserves your attention, and whether your response will improve the situation. Sometimes the answer will be yes. Sometimes you will need to speak clearly. Sometimes you will need to walk away. The important thing is that the decision comes from judgment rather than impulse. Your objective is not to prove that you are tougher than someone else. Your objective is to remain in command of yourself. People may try to provoke you precisely because they want to see you lose control. Do not make their strategy successful. If someone expects anger and receives calmness, they lose information about you. If they expect desperation and see patience, they lose leverage. If they expect you to defend every accusation and you simply remain focused on what matters, they lose the ability to pull you into unnecessary conflict. The strongest person in the room is not always the loudest. Often, it is the person who can remain composed when everyone else is losing control. Master your reaction, and you take back the power that disrespect was trying to steal from you. A boundary is not a wall you build to keep everyone away. It is a line that tells the world where your responsibility ends and where someone else's behavior begins. Without boundaries, even the strongest person can slowly become exhausted, resentful, and powerless because they spend their time responding to demands that should never have controlled them. If you want people to think twice before disrespecting you, you must first become clear about what you will and will not accept. Many people believe boundaries are created through confrontation. They imagine that being respected requires becoming louder, harsher, or more intimidating. But a boundary does not become stronger because you shout it. A boundary becomes stronger because you consistently enforce it. The moment your behavior matches your words, people begin understanding that your standards are real. Consider what happens when you tell someone, please don't speak to me that way. But every time they repeat the behavior, you continue the conversation exactly as before. Your words have communicated a boundary, but your actions have communicated something different. People pay attention to the actions. They learn that your limits can be crossed without consequence. You may become frustrated, but frustration alone does not create a boundary. A stronger approach is calm and simple. You do not need a long explanation. You do not need to list every mistake the other person has ever made. You can simply identify the behavior and decide what you will do if it continues. I'm willing to discuss this, but not if we are insulting each other. That is enough. Then your next action must support the statement. This is where self-respect becomes practical rather than theoretical. Self-respect is not merely telling yourself that you deserve better. It is making decisions that reflect that belief. If a conversation repeatedly becomes insulting, you can end it. If someone continually ignores reasonable limits, you can reduce your involvement. If someone repeatedly takes advantage of your time, you can become less available. You are not punishing them. You are deciding what kind of environment you are willing to participate in. The mistake many people make is waiting until they are furious before establishing a boundary. They tolerate small violations for weeks or months, saying nothing because they want to keep the peace. Then eventually the pressure becomes unbearable and they explode. Suddenly the other person focuses on their anger instead of the behavior that created the problem. The real issue gets buried beneath the emotional reaction. Do not wait until you hate someone to establish a boundary. Speak early. Speak calmly. Speak clearly. You should also understand that not every boundary needs to be announced. Sometimes your behavior can communicate it. You do not have to tell someone, I will no longer allow you to waste my time. You can simply stop making yourself endlessly available. You do not have to announce, I refuse to be manipulated. You can simply stop changing your decisions every time someone applies pressure. This quiet consistency is powerful because it removes unnecessary drama. You are not trying to make another person feel bad. You are simply changing your participation, and this is where confidence becomes essential. If you establish a boundary but immediately become afraid that the other person will dislike you, you may abandon it. You may begin explaining yourself, apologizing, or negotiating against your own standards. The boundary disappears because your need for approval becomes stronger than your commitment to yourself. You must become comfortable with the fact that some people will dislike your boundaries. That does not automatically mean your boundaries are wrong. A person who benefited from your lack of boundaries may naturally resist when you become more selective with your time and energy. They may call you selfish. They may say you have changed. They may accuse you of being difficult. But sometimes what they call difficult is simply behavior they can no longer control. Still, do not confuse healthy boundaries with controlling other people. You cannot decide what another person must think, say, or feel. You can decide what you will participate in. You cannot force someone to respect you, but you can decide what happens when they repeatedly refuse to do so. That distinction gives you freedom. Strong boundaries also require consistency across different relationships. If you demand respect from others but constantly disrespect yourself, your confidence will remain fragile. If you tell people not to interrupt you but you constantly interrupt others, your standard becomes hypocrisy. Your boundaries become credible when they are part of a larger personal code. Be respectful but expect respect. Be patient but do not accept endless mistreatment. Be forgiving but do not repeatedly ignore patterns that harm your peace. Be confident but do not become arrogant. The goal is not to make people afraid of you. The goal is to make your standards predictable. When people know that you remain calm, that your words have meaning, and that repeated disrespect changes your level of participation, they no longer have unlimited access to you. That is the kind of strength that does not require threats, anger, or performance. A boundary is powerful when you are willing to honor it yourself. There is another level of strength that most people never develop because they are too focused on being understood. They believe that if someone disrespects them, the answer is to explain themselves more clearly. They explain their intentions, their reasons, their history, and everything they believe the other person needs to know. But there comes a point where explanation stops being communication and becomes a form of surrender. You begin trying to convince someone who has no real interest in understanding you. One of the most powerful habits you can develop is learning when not to explain yourself. This does not mean refusing accountability. If you make a genuine mistake, own it. If you hurt someone unintentionally, listen. If you are responsible for something, correct it. Strength does not mean pretending you are always right. Real confidence allows you to admit mistakes without feeling that your entire identity has been attacked. But there is a difference between accountability and unnecessary self-defense. Some people will question every decision you make. They will demand explanations, not because they genuinely want clarity, but because they want access to your attention. They want you to become uncomfortable enough that you start defending yourself. Once you enter that cycle, they keep asking questions, challenging your answers, and moving the standard every time you satisfy the previous one. You explain one thing and they question another. You answer that question and they bring up something else. You clarify your intentions and suddenly they are criticizing your personality. If you continue participating, the conversation can become endless. This is why powerful communication often contains fewer words, not more. When you know your position, you do not need to decorate it with 100 explanations. You can state your decision clearly and allow it to stand. Imagine someone asks why you declined an invitation. You say, "I'm not available." If they genuinely care, they may ask whether everything is okay, and you can choose how much to share. But if they begin demanding justification, making you feel guilty, or trying to pressure you into changing your decision, you do not need to produce a courtroom defense. You are allowed to have limits. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to choose differently from other people. And you are allowed to keep some decisions private. The need to explain yourself often comes from fear. You worry that someone will think badly of you. You worry that they will misunderstand you. You worry that they will become angry. So you keep talking, hoping that the perfect explanation will finally make them approve. But you cannot control another person's interpretation. Someone determined to misunderstand you can turn even the most reasonable explanation into another accusation. If you spend your life correcting every false impression, you will never have enough time to live your own life. This is where emotional discipline becomes important again. When someone challenges you, notice the urge to immediately defend yourself. Notice the feeling that says, "I have to prove them wrong." Then pause, ask yourself, does this person actually need an explanation, or do I simply need their approval? That question can save you from countless unnecessary arguments. You should also learn to distinguish between silence and avoidance. Silence is not always the answer. There are situations where communication is necessary, especially when misunderstanding could cause real harm or when a relationship deserves honest discussion. The point is not to become silent in every difficult situation. The point is to stop speaking merely because you are afraid of being judged. Speak when your words create clarity. Speak when your words protect an important boundary. Speak when accountability is necessary. But do not speak simply because someone is demanding access to your private reasoning. There is dignity in saying, "That is my decision," and leaving it there. There is strength in saying, "I understand that you disagree," without beginning a debate. There is confidence in saying, "I'm not going to argue about this," and then refusing to be pulled back into the argument. People may interpret this as arrogance if they are accustomed to having unlimited access to your attention. Let them. Your responsibility is not to make every person comfortable with your boundaries. Another powerful shift occurs when you stop trying to win every conversation. Not every accusation needs an answer. Not every opinion deserves a rebuttal. Not every insult deserves a response. Your attention is a limited resource, and giving it away to every person who provokes you is a form of self-neglect. Think carefully about what deserves your energy. If someone you respect raises a legitimate concern, listen. If someone who cares about you points out a mistake, consider it. If someone is trying to manipulate you through endless criticism, recognize the pattern. If someone simply wants to provoke you, do not reward the behavior with an emotional performance. Your silence does not need to be dramatic. You do not have to walk away while making sure everyone notices. Sometimes you simply stop participating. And remember, confidence is not the belief that everyone will understand you. Confidence is knowing that you can survive being misunderstood. Once you develop that ability, you become much less controllable. You no longer need to chase approval after every disagreement. You no longer need to defend every decision. You no longer need to prove your worth to people who have already decided what they want to believe. Your life becomes quieter because you stop turning every interaction into a trial where you must prove your innocence. You do not owe everyone an explanation. You owe yourself honesty, accountability, and the courage to stand by your values. The final level of this journey is understanding that respect is not created by one powerful response. It is created by the person you become over time. You can say the perfect sentence during an argument, establish the perfect boundary, or remain calm when someone tries to provoke you. But if your everyday behavior is inconsistent, people will eventually see through the performance. Real authority comes from alignment. Your words, decisions, habits, and standards must tell the same story. This is why you should stop thinking about respect as something you need to win from other people. Think of it as the natural result of self-mastery. When you control your emotions, protect your boundaries, choose your words carefully, and refuse to chase approval, your presence changes. You become less reactive. You become more deliberate. You stop walking into every conflict simply because someone opened the door, and that transformation begins internally. You cannot build lasting confidence while constantly measuring yourself through other people's reactions. If someone praises you, you feel powerful. If someone criticizes you, you feel worthless. If someone accepts you, you feel secure. If someone rejects you, you begin questioning everything about yourself. That is not stability. That is emotional dependence. A stronger person learns to separate feedback from identity. You can listen to criticism without allowing it to define you. You can accept useful information while rejecting unnecessary insults. You can admit when you are wrong without believing that being wrong makes you inferior. You can hear someone's opinion without treating it as a verdict on your character. This is where self-respect becomes unshakable. When you respect yourself, you stop participating in situations that repeatedly destroy your peace. You stop begging people to understand your value. You stop chasing those who continually make you prove that you deserve basic consideration. You stop competing for attention with people who have already shown that they do not value your presence. This does not mean cutting everyone off at the first disagreement. Mature strength is not fragile. It allows room for mistakes, conversations, forgiveness, and growth. But it also recognizes patterns. One mistake may be a mistake. Repeated behavior is information. Pay attention to patterns. Notice who respects your boundaries. Notice who listens when you speak. Notice who can disagree without attacking you. Notice who celebrates your progress instead of constantly minimizing it. Notice who apologizes sincerely and changes their behavior. And notice who only respects you when they need something from you. You do not need to expose every person who behaves badly. You simply need enough awareness to decide how much access they should have to your time and attention. Your attention is one of your most valuable resources. Where you place it shapes your life. If you spend it constantly responding to insults, arguments, gossip, manipulation, and unnecessary conflict, you have less of it available for your goals, relationships, learning, and personal growth. This is why powerful people often appear calm. Their calmness is not accidental. They have learned that not everything deserves their energy. Someone can say something foolish and they cannot correct it. Someone can underestimate them and they do not have to immediately prove themselves. Someone can dislike them and they do not have to chase approval. Someone can walk away and they do not have to beg them to stay. That kind of emotional independence changes everything. The goal is not to make people fear you. The goal is to become so grounded that disrespect no longer controls your behavior. If someone behaves badly, you can respond appropriately without becoming the same kind of person. You can protect yourself without becoming cruel. You can be firm without becoming aggressive. You can walk away without needing revenge. That is real strength. And remember that consistency matters more than intensity. You do not need to have one dramatic moment where you finally show everyone who you are. Build your character quietly, keep your promises, speak honestly, control your temper, respect other people's boundaries while defending your own, learn from your mistakes, choose your relationships carefully, give your attention to things that genuinely matter. Over time, people notice. They notice that you do not collapse under criticism. They notice that pressure does not easily change your decisions. They notice that you can disagree without becoming hostile. They notice that you are willing to leave unhealthy situations rather than constantly complain about them. They notice that your words are supported by your actions. That is how reputation is built, not through intimidation, not through threats, not through constantly reminding people that they should respect you. It is built through consistency. Eventually, the question changes from how do I make people fear disrespecting me to something much more powerful. How do I become a person who respects himself so deeply that he no longer needs to control anyone else's opinion? That is the real destination. When you master your emotions, protect your boundaries, stop over-explaining, release your need for approval, and act according to your principles, you become difficult to manipulate. Not because you have become dangerous, but because you have become internally anchored. And when your inner world no longer depends on other people's approval, Their disrespect loses the power to define you. Become so disciplined in your self-respect that your behavior speaks before your words ever need to.